How many people that are here now were here yesterday? Fantastic. And so if you weren't, you can talk to the other people and get caught up. But what we did talk about yesterday was the complication around operation models. How do you structure the operation of a new broadband network, whether it's with an existing internet service provider that you have partnered with to expand or improve on a network in your community, or it's a whole new partnership with a whole new internet service provider in your community. Who's going to own the infrastructure? How much of the operation are they going to take on versus others, and that kind of thing. So the reason that we spent so much time on that yesterday is because what we have learned over the last 5 years of working in this realm is that when you choose a certain operation model, it can sometimes open up a box of tools for financing and funding, or it can close the toolbox on a couple options for you. And so the relationship between the funding options you have and your operation options is very intertwined. And it sometimes takes a little bit of 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back to figure out which operation model fits the characteristics and strengths of a community and ISP partnership, and what funding is available and can be leveraged for that particular community and operation models. So now we've identified the problem, trying to figure out, what is the financing mechanism? Commissioner Johnson was talking about the innovative financing mechanism to expand broadband faster and further. And that's really the conundrum, because we can't just create a cookie cutter solution that applies to every single community. It has to, one community is one community. We have to figure it out every time. But are there ways, are there tools that we don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch every time? And so that's the solution that we're now seeking, and I definitely welcome additional thought partners in that effort over the next couple of months. So that's what I'm here to represent and hope to dive into with the rest of the panel here.
My name is John Egan. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at CEI. Coastal Enterprises, we're a community development financial institution, sort of a non-bank bank. We are a business lender, so we support small business expansion and startups, as well as community development projects. And broadband is absolutely right in our wheelhouse in terms of what we're trying to support for economic development around the state. And to what Stephenie just said, that's part of what I'm hoping to pick up from participating here as well, is to see about what some of those replicable models, or even if it's a one-off that worked well and we just have to tweak it a little bit. CEI has about $20 million a year that we put out in business lending, and I've got a penciled earmark of about $2.5 to $3 million of that this year that we would love to focus on broadband projects. So we have financing. I want to make the distinction between funding and financing. We're a lender, not a grant maker. So if we're financing your project, that means it's a loan, which means it has to get paid back. We can be flexible, more flexible than a bank with how we structure that loan. But the basics of we have to have something to secure the loan for collateral, and we have to be able to see how you're going to get your subscription base ramped up so that you've got a revenue stream to repay our loan. Those are the basics. Specifically also, Nick wanted me to talk about how we work with banks. Occasionally, one-off here and there, we might end up competing with a bank for a particular project that we invest in, but almost all of the time, 98% of the time, we are working in conjunction with Maine's community banks and regional banks to share risk. We can do some things that the banks can't do. They can do a lot of things that we can't do, like loan $9 or $10 million into a deal. My average loan size is about $170,000, up over about $1.5 million, and I'm in the deep end of the pool. So we're not doing the large projects, but we can participate in those. And one of the ways that we get community banks to take a look at some of the things that we like to do is to encourage them to see the larger community benefits. Every community bank has a regulatory scorecard called the Community Reinvestment Act, and it is a oversight by whatever federal agency is looking after them, and there's a couple based on the structure of the bank. But essentially, their federal regulators are looking at their loan and equity investments across their footprint. And the Community Reinvestment Act has a number of criteria that those banks have to comply with. So their CRA scorecard is important. It gives them better borrowing rates, and when they get a better review, they can brag about it and tell their shareholders, if they have shareholders or their mutual members, that they're doing good things in their community. And we all see the evidence of community banks, and Maine's community banks do a really good job of this, of showing what they can do in their community and supporting community projects. So we would be very interested to see if we could find a good broadband project where we could bring a bank in and get them understanding the dynamics and sort of where the risk points are and where the expansion opportunities are. Certainly a role that I try and promote with CEI is for us to take off the sharp edge of the new stuff and bring it more mainstream so that the banks can do it after we do 1, 2, or 3 of them. And that would absolutely be the model that we'd like to try and do with broadband. Banks have lots of money, and they really want to lend it, and they really want to spend it in your communities. So if we can do a better job of explaining to them how they can make those loans, that's a good role for us to play.
Great. Do we have any bankers in the audience? I know there was somebody from Bangor Savings who was here earlier. I think we're going to go over to Tim. We're speaking of people who have a lot of money.
That's for sure. Well, can you hear me? My name is Tim Brooks. I'm a transplant. I heard the calling from the young lady this morning that said Maine was calling, but I'm actually in New Hampshire because the taxes are cheaper. Sorry about that, but you guys got to deal with me anyway. So I'm based out of New Hampshire. I cover the New England states for USDA Rural Utility Service. I wanted to point out to Bob Nadeau. Did I say it right? Pretty close. It's Meadow, but Neto. That's better there. And he is the Community Programs Director. I just want to point out USDA. He does a lot of work here. You guys probably know him, but if not, appreciate him coming with me. Basically, USDA has lots of money, like you said, lots of different pockets. So keep that in mind, from housing to water and waste to anything basically related to a community. We can build a community from the ground up. I happen to represent the utilities division, and we focus on broadband. So I'm going to talk about broadband, but I'm also going to talk about DLT, which is distance learning and telemedicine. So when I use an acronym, at least you'll know what it is. So, but everybody knows about the $1 billion new program, Reconnect program, probably. If not, go to USDA.gov and /Reconnect. It's a program that is funding about $1 billion in 3 different pots of money. Grants, 50-50 loan grant, and a 2% long-term fixed.
Do you have an announcement, Tim, today?
I do not. I wish I did. In fact, there's a story to that. I could go on and on. So yeah, I appreciate that. I won't even go into it. There was a funny thing about that, but anyway, I apologize. So we did, just to let you all know, we did have 78 grant applications for the grants, 53, 50-50 nationwide, that is, of course, and 15 loans throughout the nation. So if we're all funded in the New England area, that our applications are a total of 5, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that is about 4% of the nation's potential funding. And realize that the regulations are conducive to very underserved areas, as you well know, 10-by-1 service, which is somewhat hard to find those locations. So to comment on future USDA Reconnect program. We're in round 1, and announcements, as Mark mentioned, are supposed to be coming any day. We're a little bit slow, and we're very short-staffed, so I apologize. But round 2 is being talked. So I have been told, and it'll change tomorrow, January and February will be potential workshops, and there is a potential that March for today is potentially the next funding round for that. So keep your eyes and ears open and be prepared. We're not going to have a shutdown. I called that, so I'm not going to allow a shutdown this year. So quickly, the Farm Bill program, we have 2 in Maine in the works right now, so thank you for your participation, ISPs, in that. They're going to rewrite that program, so keep an eye on that. There's some potential that program will be even better than it was, so that's great. Community Connect will be soon to be announced. That's a grant program for about up to $3 million. It's a 15% match. And there were 62 applications. And typically there's anywhere from 15 to 20 applications per year. So those could be announced at any time. We have an infrastructure loan sitting there on the books for Maine. Appreciate that. And I think that probably pretty much sums it up very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to go to Carlos. We're going to save you for last, Peggy, because I know that we're going to.
So thank you. I'm Carlos Mello. I am with the Finance Authority of Maine, better known as FAME. Our role is to help you all fill some gaps in the financing. So the way we do that is by helping to attract financial capital of the state. And we do that in really 2 ways. We have a direct loan program as well as loan insurance guarantee program that we do with financial lenders. It's been used quite a bit within the broadband community to support the growth of ISPs in the state because they've been able to harness those guarantees to help fund their growth and their ability to grow. The other thing that we do, that's the risk side of the model. So we talk about de-risking transactions because I know a lot of us talk about out there that there's a lack of available financial investment. There's a lack of financial investment available. There's a lot of liquidity in the markets. It's really finding liquidity that's willing to invest at the risk that you're presenting. And so by working with the Finance Authority or others like John's team at CEI, what we're doing is introducing capital or capital support that helps de-risk that investment and helps bring investment into the state. So the other side of risk is return. And so we have ways to help impact the return model. And one of the things that we do is we administer the credit programs, like tax credit programs for the state. New markets tax credits with the state issues, which need to be further funded to be valuable. But we do have a program that once the legislature does that, that will be helpful. And the seed capital tax program, which is available for smaller companies in technology to help them grow. And that puts a floor under those investments. And so that's one of the de-risking opportunities that we do, or enhancing of return. The other one is we are one of the state agencies that are allowed to help municipalities issue conduit bonds. And that's the way for many of you in the audience that you're able to get to the tax-exempt markets. You can go to the bond bank, you can go to other members of the state organizations, but you can issue revenue bonds that are supported by FAME, and as the issuer, the source of repayment comes from your project, and that takes it from being taxable to being tax-exempt. And so now it's municipal bond rates rather than taxable rates. So those are some of the programs that we do, but my message to all of us is to work hard to figure out ways to make transactions and what we're doing accessible so that people will fund our projects. Unfortunately, that means the communities inevitably are stepping up and guaranteeing the projects through one manner or another, whether it's having an implicit guarantee on what they're going to do as far as take rates, what they're building into their mill rates to be able to build out infrastructure. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have a model in the state that allows the state to take on that risk with you. And I'd love to talk to Peggy and the legislators that are here as we're talking about funding some of the bond programs that we've talked about. That could be used in part to help co-insure that risk. And that would be a goal that I would hope that would come out of these discussions.
So I think it's really important to note that Carlos has been participating in the state economic development planning process and the broadband working group. And part of the reason he's here today is because I don't think this group collectively, those of us involved in broadband around the state, understand really what FAME does or how you can be useful. I suspect some of Ben's members and some of the other ISPs in the room may have a better understanding of that, but I think for those of us who are looking at how do you fund a project, it's helpful to have somebody coming in and saying, like to do a little bit more. We're going to turn over to Peggy in just a second, and just to set a little context, if we were going to build broadband in Maine like we built roads, it's a $1.6 billion build, maybe a little bit more, for a dark fiber open access network that the internet service providers could compete on. We're talking about the very messy, cheaper option that leverages the private sector. That means we need to figure out how to structure the government subsidies, how to combine all 4, 5 of the conversations here into one conversation that builds a project. That's not something that we can plan out on a map. We can't say we're going to do Route 201 here from here to here. We have to go where the communities are interested. The dollars have to go to the projects where there is the community interest and the community interest in the take rates. And so that's the public-private partnership. That's what we're talking about when we talk about building broadband in Maine and that partnership. That collaboration between internet service providers, communities, state agencies. That's what we're talking about, and we can't draw that out and say here's where it's going to happen. We might have a community step forward and say, we're in, we got it. We should be trying to fund those communities. So with that, Peggy.
So
how do we get there? Can you save us?
I just want to put this right out there. I still have no money. This whole conversation, all of the work that you guys are doing in your communities is really hard work. There's no question. And it is, it's frustrating for me to only be able to help you with small little bits of money. Franklin County has been working 3 years on this. We've helped them with small little bits of money, but he's getting ready for a build, and I can't help him. I cannot help him. I do not have the money. I'm sorry. You didn't know that. And that is true in we have a lot of challenges in the state when I look at sort of where we've given grants, where we haven't given grants. It's interesting to look where, there are places where there are active providers who are very interested and are engaged in doing this, and then there are places where the current sitting provider doesn't appear to be active at this moment. And so those are more challenging communities. A couple things we've done in the past couple of years, we changed our standard for who's eligible for grants. It used to be, I don't know. It used to be nothing over nothing, essentially. And now we're at 25.3, which is the federal standard. So if you are less than 25.3, you are eligible for a ConnectME infrastructure grant. Anybody can apply for a community planning grant. There's no requirement around speeds there, but for an infrastructure grant, it is 25.3. We have a build standard of 10 over 10. And for me, the important piece of that standard is the 10 up, because the downspeed is how the world talks to Maine, and the upspeed is how Maine talks to the world. And from economic development purposes, it's the up that matters. And so it's really clear to me that as we move into this, the upspeed is really both what drives the technology and the important piece for economic development and for community development. We are funded by a small fee on people's phones, landlines and VoIP. It's 0.25% of your bill, only on landlines and VoIP. 3 companies make up 71% of our funding. So they collected from their customers at 71% of our funding. So it's a pretty unstable funding base. It's been shrinking over time. This past year, the legislature increased our funding by taking the E911 fee, which was 45 cents. They dropped that to 35 cents and gave the other 10 cents to ConnectME, which should have been about $1.5 million, $2 million a year, calendar year. Unfortunately, where it got put in statute, it's a subsection of our current funding mechanism, which means that once again, cell phones are voluntary, and they have never volunteered. Can you imagine they've never volunteered? So that means that the $1.5 to $2 million funding is probably going to be less than $1 million. So Merry Christmas. We still intend to do 2 rounds this spring. We have some cash flow issues, which I don't have to bore you about getting into state government, but essentially we have to have the cash before we can loan it, before we can give it out. These things, you know, state government. Just borrow like the federal government. And so we probably will do one, we're thinking March-ish, and then another one at our usual time, which is May-ish. And we may, depending on what our cash looks like, and our original plan was to do about a $400,000 round in March, and then our normal $700,000 round in May and June. We may split that $700,000 round, so we have essentially 400 in March and 400 in June. I wish I had better news, but I have asked for a change in the budget language. We'll see if that goes through. It would bring cell phones under, which would both stabilize the base and make the funding stream a little bigger. But even with that, even with $3 million a year, it's a $1.6 billion problem. I hope to retire someday. So we need, this is an infrastructure piece. It is not unlike roads. It is not unlike the funds that we provide to the university and the community colleges so that they can have the infrastructure they need to educate kids. We need that same infrastructure so our communities can survive. There is essentially a 4-to-1 return on investment. That's what the new numbers are showing us for an investment in broadband. We focus a lot on the importance of this for the business community. For me, it's just as important for the communities that we live in. I mean, I had someone say to me once that, you know, we should stop investing in rural Maine because those communities are going to die anyways. And my answer, after I paused for a moment, was they're not really. They're not really. Communities do not go away in Maine. It takes them forever, and while they're going away, we are paying a lot of money for roads. We're paying a lot of money for schools with declining populations. We're paying a lot of money for a whole variety of things, and if we can help that community survive with a small investment, we should do that because that's cheaper than all that other stuff. And so I think the role of broadband in community development is not about strictly the businesses in your community. It really is about your community and all the things you can do across the internet and all the innovation that happens. You know, a number of years ago, you know, Airbnb did not exist. It didn't exist. It is now the largest hotel chain, largest hotel in the world. It doesn't own anything. That kind of innovation is what happens across when you have an open and easy access internet. And we need to do that. You know, we've had a bond. The governor proposed a bond last year of $30 million. She knocked it down to $15 million. It still didn't make it through. We invest, building a new road costs between $1 million and $3 million in a rural area per mile. In the city, it's between $3 and $5 million per mile. Broadband is $30,000 a mile. My town, when we pave probably 2 miles of road a year. Our paving budget is $350,000 for 2 miles of road, and that doesn't include people and it doesn't include trucks. That's just the pavement. This is a small investment for communities, and it's a small investment for the state, given the return. And so, you know, I find this conversation, because I have it all the time, a little depressing. And so I think it's important that we all remember what we're trying to do and what the impact it's going to have on the Maine economy. Now, for all of you communities that are struggling through this, I will say, if we do get a bond this year, we're going to need to get that out on the street. And he's got money he needs to get out on the street. The FCC has potentially they have this fund called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which is they're going to do a reverse auction in next fall. It's $20 billion, $16 billion in the first year, $4 billion in the next year. You all need to get your act together, because this kind of tranche of money is probably not going to come again for a little bit. So start working, work with your ISPs, get your plan together, and even if you don't qualify or don't get the federal funds, the work that you have done to both bring your community together makes it so much easier for you to figure out how you're going to fund this. And again, I'm really sorry that this is this hard. It shouldn't be this hard.
But that is where we're at. As we move into questions, write them down on the note cards. We'll get them up here. I think the other thing to make sure you're paying attention to is the new scoring criteria for the ConnectME Authority. Those were redone for the last round with the new eligibility criteria. There are some tweaks and some changes to the scoring criteria. Take a look at that. If you looked at ConnectME funds a little while ago, it's worth looking at again. I think before we go to questions, I'd like you guys to talk amongst yourselves, and Stephenie has the microphone, so.
Sure. One thought that I've been having, and maybe this is spurring from that depression feeling that we have, there's not enough money or it's not applicable to my community. A lot of thought has been put into, well, we're not doing this, we're just going to wait to be saved. We're just going to wait for the market failure to not be a failure anymore. And it's coming from an economic case that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. So I'm not going to spend it. Or I'm going to spend it on something else. And I want to reverse that thought and say $1 today lost is worth more than $1 lost tomorrow. So every day that your community is spinning its wheels and not moving toward a solution, you're losing dollars that are not going to be as valuable tomorrow.
I will also say survival is optional for communities. It really is. It's optional. It's up to you to figure it out. And I don't want to say that. I mean, there's lots of people who can help you. We're very interested in this. But survival is optional. And you guys have all figured this out already, or you wouldn't be in this room. Go ahead. No, I'm done.
I wanted to add, I forgot a pretty important thing. On the DLT for communities, just for example, this year we had $60 million, and theoretically every grant that was eligible is looking likely to be funded. So you have a 100% chance of funding. And you guys are the only ones that know that right now, because nobody's told anybody else yet. But one caveat they put in the reg last year was that, and most of you probably know that, but just in case you don't, for example, on the learning side, we had a application come in, and they used the regulation allows 20% of that grant, up to $500,000, to be used for broadband facilities. So I won't say who it was because it hasn't been released yet, but one of the big universities was using part of that hardware that they were using for distance learning to use 20% of the overall project to provide fiber to the rest of their buildings. So for the small communities out here, keep that in mind. There was the young lady that was talking about the island. In Wyoming, we don't have islands, but so I'm not aware of how that works exactly. But no, but she might be able to use that distance learning for her hardware needs. Just a FYI.
Yeah, that was a big change this year, 20%. That's a nice change. The FCC is also looking at a telemedicine fund, and for the first time, they are looking to fund connections to people's homes. So it'll be the first time they've ever actually went out and funded connections to patients' homes. So that's good.
So I've got a couple of, do you want to keep?
No.
Okay, I have a couple of quick questions. Peggy, do you have you made a statement about 4-to-1 return on broadband for investment. We have some folks looking for that resource.
Yeah, so there's a couple people who do research on this. The one is a guy from Purdue, whose name I'm going to forget. His first name is Robert, and it's G-R. I have it. And he has done a bunch of, I've sat in on a bunch of webinars that he has done, and that is one of the numbers he uses. There's another guy who does great research for the Oklahoma State University. His name is Brian Whitaker. The last name is spelled like acre. And he and they team up a lot and do a tremendous amount of research. So I do, send me an email at peggy.schaeffer@maine.gov, and I'll get you the source for that.
They're on the website.
Huh?
You should write a blog name for They're on the website.
Next,
Both those studies are on your website.
On the Maine Broadband Coalition
Yeah.
go to the Maine Broadband Coalition website, look at the resources, and sign up to be a member. Tim, this one's for you. So I think there's some curiosity about why the USDA has one definition for underserved or eligibility for program at 10.1, and the FCC has a different eligibility criteria or definition of underserved. And the comment here is it's a huge barrier for communities whose service isn't good enough to function or have pockets where it's marginally okay. Additionally to that, in the same vein, I think some of the restrictions in the Reconnect program, where Maine School Library Network, we did a great job connecting our libraries, and now we can't use them as part of our eligibility criteria. So
great questions. Yeah, I'm frustrated with that. I have been, we've been told in the field that in the second round, so the rewrite of the regulations for the second round is still pending, and there are changes that could be made. There's been hints that the speed limits will go up, but most likely they won't. But I think depending on how long this program is funded, I do know, and don't ask me why. I'm a banker for 25 years, and I'm not a telecom expert. But for 2 years, I've been learning, and I know that when I first started, there was talks about the FCC's 25.3 regulation. Now, I don't know if this is true, was increased because of the pressure that USDA put on them and others because of the I can't remember which program. So I think the push is out there, and we had feedback that was available through the Reconnect program, through the email and the website. We had lots of emails and lots of suggestions that the 10x1 was definitely a hindrance, and the only reply that I can say right now is from basically senior management, Secretary of Ag level, I'm guessing, or what we're getting is, as long as we have a lot of funding, and obviously the numbers that I gave you, theoretically, except for the loan portion, the 50-50 loan grant and the grant programs were heavily oversupplied or subscribed by double. So if we get more funding, my opinion is this, and this is opinion only, is that if we continue to get more funding in the Reconnect program by Congress, I would guess that limit will change within time, very hopefully quick time.
So this is not USDA's fault. Congress put that number in there. They did give them the ability to reevaluate it in future rounds, but the 10.1 was put in by Congress, so it's not.
Okay.
Okay. So a couple of very quick questions. What were examples of how we've seen capital stacks be effective in Maine? So we're talking about where maybe, Peggy, some of your monies come in with USDA money or with bank financing, or do we have those good models out there?
Should I say if? Cranberry Isles ends up, receiving a reimbursement. What that means is that a $10,000 planning grant leveraged a $70,000 infrastructure grant from the state, which then leveraged $1.3 million from the federal government. So and all of those steps required matches by the community. And so what that means is that for every dollar that we're putting up, we're getting $20 in federal funding into our state. And I just think bringing in that money and just injecting the state economy that way is just really powerful. And the way that Cranberry Isles was able to do that and get their matches was because of the relationships that they had with their banks. So it really is a story, a lesson in, you build a credit as an individual and a household, do it as a community as well. Reach out to your local banks, talk about those investment credits, get them interested in your community and the projects that you have going on. I don't know if you have another example.
So I have a couple. One is the rounds that we did this year that you've already heard about, the Bodenham grant, which was we did a planning grant. The provider kicked in, the community kicked in, we kicked in. That was true for Alton. It was true for Cambridge. And sort of every round for us. We have never funded a project at 100%. And so we actually, the funding that comes through ConnectME is matched a lot by the community and a lot by providers. So, I mean, we always hear at the legislature, are you going to bring down federal money with this? And we're like, we may or we may not for a whole variety of reasons, but we do bring in other funding. We're never 100% of a project. And so our money does go a lot further because the communities come in and the providers come in with additional funding. I think Unity is Unity Telephone is a great example of that. I think we gave them $400,000 over a series of rounds. They invested an additional 1.4 to bring fiber to the Unity Telephone footprint. So that's the kind of activity that can take place over time, but it's a very successful piece. I do want to call out, for a completely different model, the Down East Broadband, where that was a community, the communities put up funding themselves to backfill or to guarantee a loan. And then they created their broadband utility district, and a bank, I believe it was Machias Savings Bank, used their Community Reinvestment Act to give them a 2% loan or 1.99% loan, and they built it out. But it was because the communities agreed to sort of essentially guarantee that loan. Now, they did a lot of work on take rate, because when they went to the bank, they had to show they had a revenue stream to pay this back. So it wasn't just the bank was looking at it and saying, oh, the community's going to pay it back anyways. They didn't. They had a take rate that showed that they were going to be able to pay it back. But that's that's no state money, that's no federal money, but it is a community figuring out how to fund a build by themselves by using their own capacity as a community.
So I think part of the answer to this question is some of us speak community and some of us speak banker, and we may be saying the same things, but maybe not quite talking to each other. So I think a little bit more definition on capital stack and a little bit more sharing of the models and the examples that are out there is probably a good thing. I would also, somebody asked about a reverse auction. That makes a great blog post. Not a good thing to go into it at this point. And then finally, I think in closing, Kendra Jo's telling me it's time to wrap up. There's evidence out there that Maine's population could grow with climate change. We are actually a relatively attractive state compared to, say, Florida, which will be underwater at some point in the next, in the future. And Maine we've got nice granite shores, and we're a pretty good state. Having broadband is probably one of those things that could encourage climate migrants to come to our state. We're facing some pretty severe workforce shortages in the state as well. The last question comes from Representative Barry, and it is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think there's an element of seriousness in it too. Did the community still in the room get funding awards in the next round?
Say that again?
Did the community still in the room get money next time?
They have to, okay, so here's living in state government. Everything is a competitive grant. We can't, that's not how it works. We don't do we have no sole source contracting.
With that, I think we will close. I would say, though, that the communities in the room are showing the interest and the forward movement that makes them much more attractive to funding in the future. So thank you all for coming. Thank our panel.